The gunshot cracked through the desert air like thunder, and Natalie Thompson felt the wagon lurch violently as one of the horses screamed in terror. She clutched the wooden seat as the driver beside her slumped forward, blood blooming across his shirt like a crimson flower. The reins fell from his hands, and the horses bolted in panic. Natalie grabbed for the leather straps, but they slipped through her fingers as rough hands seized her from behind. She was yanked backward off the moving wagon, hitting the hard, packed earth with enough force to knock the wind from her lungs. "Well, well, what do we have here?" A bearded man with rotting teeth leered down at her, his breath reeking of whiskey and tobacco. "Pretty little thing, ain't she, boys?" 3 more men emerged from behind the rocks that lined the trail, their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats. This stretch of road between Douglas, Arizona territory, and the mining camps to the north had a reputation for trouble, but Natalie had been desperate enough to risk it. Now, lying in the dust with 4 outlaws circling her like vultures, she realized her desperation might have been her doom. It was May of 1883, and she had been traveling to meet her brother in Douglas after their father's death back in Missouri. The letter tucked in her bodice promised her a new start, a place to rebuild her life. Instead, she was about to lose everything. "Check the wagon," the bearded man ordered. "See what else she's got worth taking." Natalie's hand moved instinctively toward the small pistol hidden in her skirts, but a boot pressed down on her wrist before she could reach it. Pain shot up her arm and she cried out, Now, sweetheart. No need for that." The man's yellow grin made her stomach turn. "Just cooperate, and maybe we'll let you walk away from this." She knew that was a lie. Women didn't walk away from encounters like this on the frontier. The stories she'd heard in the way stations and trading posts had made that abundantly clear. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the man reached down to grab the front of her traveling dress. The rifle shot came from somewhere up in the rocks, and suddenly, the man standing over her dropped like a stone, a neat hole through his temple. The other 3 bandits scattered, diving for cover and drawing their weapons. "Drop them," a voice called out, deep and commanding. "Drop them now, or you'll join your friend." Natalie scrambled backward, her dress tearing on the rocky ground. She could see a figure silhouetted against the bright Arizona sky, positioned on a rocky outcrop about 30 yards away. He held a Winchester rifle with the easy confidence of someone who knew how to use it. One of the bandits made the mistake of trying to aim his revolver at the newcomer. Another shot rang out, and the bandit's gun went flying from his hand along with 2 of his fingers. His screams echoed across the desert as he fell to his knees, clutching his bloodied hand. "I said drop them." The voice was calm, almost conversational, but it carried an edge of steel that made the remaining 2 bandits comply immediately. Their weapons hit the dust with dull thuds. "Now mount up and ride. Take your friends with you. If I ever see any of you on this trail again, I won't be so generous." The unwounded bandits didn't need to be told twice. They grabbed their injured companion and the body of their dead leader, threw them over their horses, and galloped away in a cloud of dust. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, leaving only the whisper of wind through the scrub brush and Natalie's ragged breathing. The man descended from the rocks with surprising grace, his boots finding purchase on the steep slope as if he'd climbed it 1,000 times. As he drew closer, Natalie could make out more details. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean build. His face was shadowed by a dusty brown hat, but she could see strong features and eyes that seemed to assess everything around him with practiced efficiency. "You hurt, madam," he offered her his hand, and she noticed how rough his palm was, calloused from years of hard work. I don't think so." Her voice came out shakier than she would have liked. She took his hand and let him help her to her feet. Her legs felt like water beneath her, and she swayed slightly. His free hand moved to her elbow, steadying her. "Easy there. Take a moment. The fear hits harder after the danger's past." Natalie looked up into his face and felt her breath catch for an entirely different reason. He had removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a striking shade of green, bright against his tanned face, and they looked at her with genuine concern. A few days' worth of stubble covered his strong jaw, and there was a small scar above his left eyebrow that gave him a roguish quality. "Thank you," she managed. "If you hadn't come along, best not to think about that." He glanced at the wagon, which had stopped about 50 yards down the trail, the horses having calmed now that the shooting had ceased. "That your driver?" Natalie's hand flew to her mouth. In the chaos, she'd almost forgotten about Mr. Patterson. "Oh God, he was hired to take me to Douglas." "I need to. I'll check on him. You stay here." The man's tone was gentle but firm. She watched as he walked to the wagon, his movements measured and careful. He checked the driver's pulse, then shook his head slowly before walking back to her. The expression on his face told her everything she needed to know. "I'm sorry, madam. He's gone." Natalie felt tears sting her eyes. Mr. Patterson had been a kind man, a widower with grown children, who told her stories about his grandchildren during the journey. Now he was dead because he'd agreed to transport her. "This isn't your fault," the stranger said, reading her expression with uncanny accuracy. "Those men would have robbed anyone on this trail. You just happened to be here. What am I going to do?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper. "My trunks are on that wagon, and I don't know how to drive a team, and—" "Where were you headed?" "Douglas. My brother Nathan Thompson owns a boarding house there. I was supposed to meet him." The man nodded slowly. "Nathan Thompson. I know him. Good man. Runs a decent establishment on 3rd Street. Hope flickered in Natalie's chest. "You know my brother. Passed through Douglas plenty of times. I'm Quentin Lawson." He extended his hand again, this time in formal greeting. "I work cattle between here and New Mexico, usually trailing herds to the railhead in Douglas." "Natalie Thompson." She shook his hand, noting again the strength and warmth in his grip. "I'm grateful beyond words for what you did, Mr. Lawson." "Quentin, please. And it was the right thing to do." He glanced at the sky, where the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. "We've got maybe 3 hours of good light left. We need to get you to Douglas before dark, and we need to take Mr. Patterson's body so he can have a proper burial. Can you drive the wagon?" "Yes, madam. But I've got my horse to think about, too." He whistled sharply, and a beautiful Palomino mare trotted up from behind the rocks where she'd apparently been waiting. "This is Honey. She's particular about strangers, but I think she'll let you ride her if you're gentle." Natalie had ridden as a child, though it had been years. Still, the idea of traveling alone in the wagon with Mr. Patterson's body made her uncomfortable. "I'd rather ride if she'll have me." Quentin smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and approachable. "Let's find out." He led her to the mare, speaking softly to the animal in a low voice. Honey's ears swiveled forward, and she nuzzled Quentin's shoulder with obvious affection. "This is Natalie. She needs our help. You going to behave for her?" The horse snorted but didn't pull away when Natalie reached out to stroke her neck. Her coat was like silk under Natalie's fingers, and she felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders as the simple act of touching the animal grounded her. "She likes you," Quentin observed. "That's a good sign. Honey's not friendly with many people." He helped Natalie collect her belongings from the wagon, including a carpet bag with her most important possessions. Then he gently moved Mr. Patterson's body to a more respectful position in the wagon bed, and covered it with a canvas tarp. The whole process was handled with such care and dignity that Natalie felt tears threatening again. "You've done this before," she said quietly. "Unfortunately, yes. The frontier isn't kind, Miss Thompson. Death is a frequent visitor out here." He helped her mount Honey, his hands respectful and steady as he boosted her into the saddle. The mare shifted beneath her but didn't protest. Natalie arranged her skirts as best she could and found the stirrups, grateful for the practical riding boots she'd chosen for the journey. Quentin climbed onto the wagon seat and took up the reins with practiced ease. "We'll take it slow. Just follow alongside, and if you feel uncomfortable, let me know. We can tie Honey to the wagon and you can ride with me." The offer was kind, but Natalie found she preferred the independence of riding. "I'll be fine, thank you." They set off down the trail, the wagon wheels crunching over the rocky ground. The late afternoon sun painted the desert in shades of gold and amber, and the air smelled of sage and dust. Under different circumstances, Natalie might have found the landscape beautiful. As it was, she couldn't stop replaying the attack in her mind, seeing the bandits' yellow teeth and feeling the terror that had frozen her limbs. "You're shaking," Quentin called over. "Are you sure you're all right?" "Just thinking," she admitted. "I keep seeing it happen over and over." "That's natural. The mind needs time to process violence, especially when you've never experienced it before." He guided the team around a rough patch in the trail. "Have you lived in the East your whole life?" "Missouri, mostly. My father was a school teacher in a small town outside St. Louis. After my mother died when I was 12, it was just him and my brother and me." She found talking helped distract her from the images in her head. "Nathan came west 5 years ago to make his fortune. He wrote that there were opportunities here for anyone willing to work hard. He wasn't wrong about that. Arizona territory is growing fast, Douglas especially, with the copper mines bringing in workers and money." "What about you? Where are you from?" Quentin was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. "Texas originally. My family had a ranch outside San Antonio. When my parents died of fever, my brother took over the ranch, and I decided to try my luck elsewhere. That was 8 years ago. I've been drifting since, working cattle drives, breaking horses, doing whatever honest work I could find." "That sounds lonely." He glanced at her, surprised. "I suppose it is. Never thought about it much. The work keeps me busy, and I've always been more comfortable with animals than people." "Yet you didn't hesitate to help a stranger." "Couldn't live with myself if I'd ridden past and done nothing. My mother raised me better than that." They rode in companionable silence for a while. Natalie found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking. There was something solid and reassuring about Quentin Lawson, a quiet competence that made her feel safe despite everything that had happened. He sat easily on the wagon seat, his body moving with the rhythm of the vehicle, completely at home in this harsh landscape. "How much farther to Douglas?" she asked as the sun dipped lower. "Another 2 hours, give or take. We'll make it before full dark." He pulled a canteen from beneath the seat and held it out to her. "You should drink something. Desert air is drying, especially when you're not used to it." The water was warm but welcome. Natalie realized she hadn't had anything to drink since their brief stop at noon, hours before the attack. "Thank you. I seem to be saying that a lot. No need to keep count." His smile was easy, reaching his eyes. "Though I wouldn't object to a home-cooked meal if your brother's boarding house serves dinner." "I'll make sure you get the best meal he can provide," Natalie promised. "It's the least I can do." As they traveled, Quentin pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the region. He told her about the Kairikahua Mountains to the east, where Apache warriors had once held off the U.S. Army for years. He described the copper mines that had transformed Douglas from a dusty crossroads into a booming town. His voice was pleasant, deep and unhurried, and Natalie found herself relaxing despite the traumatic events of the afternoon. "You know a lot about this area," she observed. "Been through here more times than I can count. After a while, the land becomes familiar, like an old friend." He gestured toward a distinctive rock formation. "See that? Looks like an eagle with spread wings. I always know I'm 2 hours from Douglas when I pass it. It does look like an eagle, though I imagine at night it might look like something more sinister. The desert plays tricks on the mind after dark. That's why travelers should always make camp before sundown if they can." "Is that what you were planning to do before you came across the attack?" "I was scouting ahead. There's a cattle drive coming through in 3 days, and I was checking the trail conditions and water sources." He adjusted his grip on the reins. "I heard the first gunshot and came to investigate. Lucky timing, I suppose." "Lucky for me," Natalie said quietly, "though not for Mr. Patterson." "No, not for him." The sun was touching the horizon when they finally saw Douglas in the distance, a collection of buildings spread across the flat terrain like scattered dice. Smoke rose from chimneys, and Natalie could see the skeletal structures of mine works on the hillsides beyond the town. As they drew closer, she could hear the sounds of human activity, voices calling out, hammers striking metal, a piano playing somewhere. "3rd Street is near the center of town," Quentin said. "We'll need to stop at the sheriff's office first, though, to report what happened. Sheriff Carson will want to know about the bandits, and we need to arrange for Mr. Patterson." Natalie nodded, though the thought of recounting the attack made her stomach clench. Of course. They entered Douglas as twilight painted the sky purple and orange. The main street was busy with people finishing their day's work, and Natalie noticed several curious glances directed their way. A woman riding alone with a man and a body in the wagon was clearly unusual enough to attract attention. The sheriff's office was a squat adobe building with bars on the windows. Quentin pulled the wagon to a stop outside and helped Natalie dismount. Her legs were stiff from the ride and she stumbled slightly. His hand steadied her, warm through the fabric of her dress. "Easy. You've had a long day." Sheriff Carson turned out to be a grizzled man in his 50s with gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He listened to their story with a deepening frown, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "That would be the Dalton gang. They've been hitting travelers on that stretch of road for the past 2 months. We've sent out posses, but they know the desert too well. They disappear into the rocks like smoke." He looked at Quentin. "You say you killed one and wounded another?" "Yes, sir." "Self-defense and defense of Miss Thompson." "I'm not questioning that. You did the right thing, Lawson. Maybe it'll make them think twice before hitting the next wagon." He turned to Natalie. "I'm sorry about your driver, Miss Thompson. Jake Patterson was a good man. He'll be buried proper with full honors. The town will see to it." "Thank you, Sheriff. I'd like to contribute to the burial costs." "That's kind of you, but not necessary. Jake had friends here. We take care of our own." He made a few notes in a ledger. "You'll be staying at your brother's place?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Nathan's been expecting you. Mentioned it just last week when I stopped by for breakfast." He stood and extended his hand to Quentin. "I appreciate you bringing Miss Thompson in safely. Not many men would have put themselves at risk like that." "Couldn't do otherwise," Quentin said simply. Outside, the street lamps were being lit, casting pools of warm light along the boardwalks. Quentin helped Natalie back onto Honey and climbed onto the wagon once more. 3rd Street is just around the corner. Your brother's place is the 2-story building with the green shutters." As they rounded the corner, Natalie saw the boarding house and felt a rush of relief, so intense it nearly brought tears to her eyes. The building was larger than she'd expected, well maintained with fresh paint and flower boxes in the windows. Light spilled from the windows and she could see figures moving inside. Before they'd even stopped, the front door burst open and a tall man with sandy hair rushed out. Natalie. Nathan. She slid from the saddle and ran to her brother, throwing her arms around him. He was thinner than she remembered and more weathered, with lines around his eyes from squinting in the desert sun, but his embrace was just as warm as it had always been. "I've been worried sick," he said, pulling back to look at her. "Patterson was supposed to have you here this morning. When you didn't arrive, I was about to organize a search party." His eyes moved past her to Quentin and the wagon. "What happened?" Natalie felt the terror of the afternoon crash over her again, and suddenly she was shaking. Nathan held her tighter. "It's all right. You're safe now. Tell me." Between Natalie and Quentin, they explained the attack and rescue. Nathan's face grew grim as he listened, and when they mentioned Mr. Patterson's death, he bowed his head. "Jake was a friend. This territory takes too many good men." He turned to Quentin and extended his hand. "Nathan Thompson, I owe you a debt I can never repay. You saved my sister's life." "Quentin Lawson, I'm glad I was there to help." They shook hands, and Natalie noticed the way her brother's expression changed from gratitude to assessment. She'd seen that look before, whenever a young man had shown interest in her back home. "You'll stay for dinner," Nathan said. It wasn't a question. "And the night if you need lodging. I won't hear any arguments." "That's generous, but I don't want to impose." "It's not an imposition, it's the least I can do. Besides, I imagine my sister promised you a good meal, and I intend to see that promise kept." Quentin smiled. "In that case, I accept. Thank you." Nathan's boarding house was warm and welcoming inside, with comfortable furniture and the smell of cooking food wafting from the kitchen. Several boarders were gathered in the parlor, reading newspapers or playing cards, and they looked up with interest as the group entered. "Folks, this is my sister Natalie, just arrived from Missouri," Nathan announced. "And this is Quentin Lawson, who I'll be thanking properly once I get these two fed and settled." A plump woman with graying hair bustled out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Your sister? Oh, Nathan, why didn't you say she was here?" She turned to Natalie with a warm smile. "I'm Dorothy Hayes. I help Nathan run this place. You must be exhausted, dear." "Mrs. Hayes makes the best biscuits in Arizona Territory," Nathan said. "She's been helping me since I opened the place 3 years ago." "Oh, go on with you," Mrs. Hayes said, but she looked pleased. "Now, let's get you two cleaned up. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. Natalie was shown to a small but clean room on the second floor with a view of the street. A pitcher of water and a basin waited on the dresser, and there was a quilt on the bed that looked handmade. She washed the dust from her face and hands, changed into a fresh dress from her carpetbag, and tried to do something with her hair, which had come completely loose from its pins during the ordeal. Looking in the mirror, she was startled by her own appearance. Her face was paler than usual, her eyes too wide, and there was a bruise forming on her cheek where she'd hit the ground. She looked like someone who'd barely escaped death, which she supposed was accurate. A knock on the door made her turn. "Come in." Nathan entered, carrying her trunk, which must have been unloaded from the wagon. "Thought you might want this. Thank you." She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly feeling the full weight of the day. "It's good to see you, Nathan. I've missed you." He set the trunk down and sat beside her, taking her hand. "I've missed you too. I'm so sorry about Father. I wanted to come back for the funeral, but—" "I know. The letter said business kept you here. I understand. Still, you shouldn't have had to deal with everything alone." Selling the house, settling his affairs. It gave me something to focus on, something other than the grief. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Tell me about your life here. Your letters were always so brief." Nathan smiled. "There's so much to tell. The boarding house has been more successful than I ever imagined. I've got 10 rooms, all regularly occupied. Douglas is growing so fast, there's a constant need for clean, respectable lodging. Mrs. Hayes has been invaluable. After her husband died, she needed work, and I needed help. It's worked out well for both of us. Have you been happy here?" "Mostly, yes. It's been hard work, building something from nothing, but satisfying. The only thing missing has been family. That's why I was so glad when you wrote saying you'd come west." He paused. "I know Father's death was hard on you. You were always his favorite. I was his caretaker at the end. That's different from being a favorite. Still, you gave up a lot to nurse him through his illness. 2 years of your life." Natalie had been 19 when their father's health began to fail, a wasting sickness that slowly robbed him of strength. She'd turned down a marriage proposal from a respectable young banker to stay and care for him. By the time he died, she was 21, and the young banker had married someone else. Not that she'd regretted her choice. Her father had needed her, but it had meant putting her own life on hold. "I don't regret it," she said firmly. "He was a good father. He deserved better than to die alone." "You deserve happiness, Natalie, a life of your own. That's why I'm here, a fresh start in a new place." She managed a smile, though I didn't expect it to start quite so dramatically. Nathan's expression turned serious. "What you went through today, most people never experience anything like that. If you need time to process it, to rest." "I'll be fine. I'm stronger than I look." "I know you are. You've always been strong." He squeezed her hand. "But even strong people need support. Don't try to shoulder everything alone." They went down to dinner together, joining the other boarders and Quentin at a long table in the dining room. Mrs. Hayes had outdone herself with roasted chicken, vegetables, fresh bread, and the promised biscuits. The conversation flowed easily, with the other guests welcoming Natalie and expressing horror at her ordeal. Quentin sat across from her, mostly quiet but occasionally adding details when asked. She noticed how the other men at the table treated him with respect, as if they recognized a competent man when they saw one. He handled his knife and fork with surprising grace, and his table manners were impeccable, suggesting education beyond what his weathered appearance might indicate. "So, Lawson, you said you're here scouting for a cattle drive?" one of the boarders asked, a mining engineer named Robert Stern. "Yes, sir. 300 head coming through in a few days. We're taking them to the railhead here in Douglas, then they'll be shipped east." "Whose outfit are you working for?" "McAllister Ranch out of New Mexico. I've been with them for 2 seasons now." "That's Bill McAllister's place," Nathan said. "I know Bill. Good man, fair employer," Quentin nodded. "He's treated me well. The work is hard but honest." "Will you stay in Douglas long?" Natalie asked, then immediately wondered if the question sounded too eager. "Depends on how long it takes to load the cattle and handle the business end. Usually a week or so." His green eyes met hers across the table. "Though I might stay longer this time. I've been thinking about settling down somewhere, maybe starting my own place." "There's good land available around here," Nathan said. "Not too expensive if you're willing to work for it." After dinner, Nathan showed Quentin to a guest room, refusing to accept any payment. "You saved my sister's life. That's worth more than 1,000 nights lodging." The other boarders gradually drifted off to their rooms, and Mrs. Hayes finished cleaning the kitchen. Nathan poured 2 whiskeys and gestured for Quentin to join him on the front porch. Natalie, heading upstairs, paused when she heard her brother speak. "Tell me honestly, Lawson, how bad was it?" Natalie tried to downplay things, but I know my sister. She was terrified. "It was bad," Quentin said quietly. "If I'd arrived 5 minutes later." He didn't finish the sentence. "She handled herself well, though, kept her head, didn't panic. She's a remarkable woman." "Yes, she is. She's been through a lot these past few years. Our father's death hit her hard. She mentioned that, said she nursed him through his illness. For 2 years. Never complained, never asked for help. Just did what needed to be done." Nathan paused. "I worry about her. She deserves someone who'll treat her right, who'll appreciate what she's worth." Natalie felt her cheeks heat and quickly continued up the stairs before she could hear any more. Her brother was not subtle. But as she got ready for bed, she found herself thinking about Quentin Lawson, about the way his hands had steadied her, about his calm competence in the face of danger. She'd been around men before, had received proposals and invitations, but none of them had made her feel the way Quentin did. There was something about him, a quiet strength and integrity that drew her. She told herself it was gratitude, that she was confusing admiration with something deeper. But as she drifted off to sleep, it was his green eyes she saw behind her closed lids. Natalie woke to sunshine streaming through her window and the sounds of a town coming to life. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was, but then the events of yesterday came flooding back. She dressed quickly in a simple day dress and went downstairs to find the dining room already half full of boarders eating breakfast. Mrs. Hayes spotted her immediately. "Good morning, dear. Come sit down. I've got eggs and bacon keeping warm and fresh coffee." "Thank you. That sounds wonderful." Natalie took a seat at the table, accepting a plate from the older woman. "Your brother's at the general store placing an order, and Mr. Lawson left at dawn. Said he had work to attend to but would return this evening if that was acceptable." Natalie felt a pang of disappointment, which was ridiculous. The man had his own life and responsibilities. She couldn't expect him to hover around the boarding house just because he'd rescued her. Of course. He's a working man. She spent the morning helping Mrs. Hayes with household chores, grateful for something to occupy her hands and mind. The older woman was easy to talk to, full of stories about Douglas and its residents. By lunchtime, Natalie felt like she had a better understanding of her new home. Nathan returned in the afternoon with news that Mr. Patterson's funeral would be held the following day. "The whole town's turning out. Jake was well liked." "I'd like to attend," Natalie said. "Of course. I'll take you." The funeral was a somber affair held at the small church on the edge of town. Mr. Patterson's children had arrived from Tucson, and Natalie offered her condolences, explaining how kind their father had been during their journey. The oldest son, a man in his 30s, shook her hand warmly. "Father loved meeting new people, hearing their stories. I'm glad his last day was spent in pleasant company." Quentin appeared at the back of the church just as the service was starting. He'd cleaned up, wearing what was clearly his best clothes, a pressed shirt and jacket over dark trousers. His hair was neatly combed and he'd shaved, revealing the strong lines of his jaw. Natalie found her eyes drawn to him throughout the service. Afterward, as people gathered outside to talk, Quentin approached her and Nathan. "Miss Thompson, I wanted to pay my respects to Mr. Patterson's family." "That's kind of you," Natalie said. "I'm sure they'll appreciate it. Also, I was wondering if I might call on you tomorrow. There's something I'd like to show you if you're interested." Natalie's heart skipped. "What is it?" "A surprise. But I think you'll enjoy it." He looked at Nathan. "With your permission, of course, I'd have her back before dinner." Nathan studied Quentin for a long moment, then nodded. "I trust you to look after her. Just remember what happened the last time she went traveling. That won't happen again. I give you my word." The next morning dawned clear and warm, promising another beautiful day. Natalie dressed carefully in a riding skirt and practical blouse, then braided her hair to keep it out of the way. When she came downstairs, Quentin was waiting with 2 horses, Honey and a sturdy bay gelding. "Morning, Miss Thompson. Ready for an adventure?" "That depends on what kind of adventure you have in mind." His smile was genuine and warm. "The kind that involves beautiful scenery and no gunfire. I promise." They rode out of Douglas heading east, following a trail that wound through rocky terrain dotted with saguaro cactus and mesquite trees. The morning was cool, and Natalie found herself relaxing into the rhythm of riding, her body remembering skills she'd thought forgotten. "You're a natural rider," Quentin observed, "better than you gave yourself credit for." "I rode a lot as a child. My father believed girls should be as capable as boys when it came to practical skills." "Smart man. Too many people underestimate what women can do." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Natalie marveled at how easy it was to be around him. There was no need to fill every moment with chatter, no awkwardness in the quiet. It felt natural, like they'd known each other far longer than a few days. After about an hour, Quentin guided them off the main trail toward a rocky outcrop. "We'll need to walk from here. It's not far." He helped her dismount, his hands lingering a moment longer than necessary at her waist. Their eyes met, and Natalie felt something pass between them, an awareness that made her breath catch. "This way," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. They walked through a narrow gap in the rocks, and suddenly the terrain opened up into a hidden valley. A spring bubbled up from the ground, creating a small pool surrounded by green vegetation. Trees provided shade, and wildflowers grew in patches of color among the grass. It was an oasis in the desert, a secret place of beauty and peace. "Oh," Natalie breathed, "it's beautiful. I found this place 2 years ago, quite by accident, got turned around during a storm and stumbled onto it while looking for shelter." Quentin led her to a flat rock near the pool. "I've never shown it to anyone else. It felt like it should be kept secret, preserved." "Why show me, then?" He was quiet for a moment, looking out over the water. "Because when I'm here, I feel at peace, and I thought maybe you could use some peace after what you've been through." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "Thank you. This is the most beautiful thing I've seen since arriving in Arizona." They sat together on the rock, watching dragonflies skim across the water's surface. Birds called from the trees, and the sound of the spring was a gentle music. "Can I ask you something?" Natalie said. "Of course." "Why do you drift? Nathan said there are opportunities here for anyone willing to work. You clearly have the skills. Why not settle down, build something permanent?" Quentin picked up a small stone and turned it over in his fingers. "Fear, mostly. My parents built something permanent, a ranch they loved, and then they died and lost it all. My brother inherited, but he was never happy with it. Saw it as a burden instead of a blessing. I watched him slowly destroy what they'd built through neglect and poor choices." He tossed the stone into the pool, watching the ripples spread. "I told myself it was easier to not have anything to lose. If you don't build, you can't watch it fall apart. That sounds like a lonely way to live." "It is. I've been realizing that more and more lately." He turned to look at her. "Do you believe in fate, Miss Thompson?" The question surprised her. "I don't know. I believe in choices and consequences." "Why?" "Because I can't stop thinking that maybe I was meant to be on that trail at exactly that moment. That maybe saving you wasn't just chance, but something more." Natalie's heart was racing. "I've been thinking the same thing, wondering if perhaps there was a reason we met the way we did. I know it's too soon to say such things. We barely know each other. But I can't help feeling like I've been waiting my whole life without knowing what I was waiting for, and then there you were, and suddenly everything made sense." She reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I feel it too. I can't explain it, but I do." They sat like that for a long time, hands joined, watching the light play across the water. It felt momentous and simple at the same time, this acknowledgement of the connection between them. "Tell me about your life," Quentin said eventually. "I want to know everything. Your childhood, your dreams, what makes you laugh." So she told him. About growing up in Missouri, about her mother's death and how it had changed their family. About helping in her father's school, teaching younger children to read. About the books she loved, the places she dreamed of seeing. About nursing her father through his final illness, and the complex mix of grief and relief when he finally passed. Quentin listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed he was truly interested, not just being polite. When she finished, he shared more of his own story. About growing up on the Texas ranch, learning to ride before he could walk. About his mother's kindness and his father's integrity. About the grief of losing them and the difficult decision to leave his brother and the only home he'd known. "I've worked dozens of jobs since then," he said. "Cattle drives, breaking horses, even tried my hand at prospecting for a while. But the best times were always when I was working with animals. There's an honesty to them that you don't find in people. Present company accepted, I hope," he smiled. "Present company especially accepted." The sun was high overhead when they finally decided to head back. Quentin helped her to her feet, and for a moment they stood very close, his hands on her arms, her face tilted up toward his. "I'd very much like to kiss you right now," he said softly, "but I don't want to presume." "I'd like that too," she whispered. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she didn't want to. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, a tentative exploration that made her dizzy. She'd been kissed before, but never like this, never with such tenderness and restrained passion. When they pulled apart, both were breathing harder. Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "Natalie." Just her name, but the way he said it made it sound like a prayer. They rode back to Douglas in a daze of new feeling. Natalie knew she should be cautious, should protect her heart, but it was too late for that. She'd already fallen, completely and irrevocably. Over the next few days, Quentin found reasons to visit the boarding house every evening. Sometimes he brought small gifts, wildflowers he'd picked or interesting rocks he'd found. Other times he simply sat with Natalie on the porch, talking until the stars came out. Nathan watched these developments with obvious approval. Mrs. Hayes was less subtle, making comments about what a fine couple they made and how nice it would be to have a wedding to plan. The cattle drive arrived on schedule, and Quentin was busy for several days overseeing the loading of the animals onto railroad cars. Natalie missed him fiercely, surprised by how quickly she'd become accustomed to his presence. When he finally appeared at the boarding house again, he looked exhausted but happy. "It's done. The cattle are on their way east and I've been paid. You must be tired," Nathan said. "Stay for dinner." Over the meal, Quentin was quieter than usual, seeming preoccupied. When the other boarders had drifted away and Nathan had excused himself to check on something in the kitchen, Natalie touched his hand. "What's wrong? You seem troubled." "Not troubled, nervous." He took a deep breath. "I spoke to your brother earlier, asked his permission for something." Natalie's heart began to pound. "Permission for what? To court you properly, with the intention of marriage if you'll have me." The world seemed to stop. "Quentin, we've only known each other a week." "I know. It's too fast and I'm probably crazy, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He took her hands in his. "I love you, Natalie. I know I shouldn't, I know it's too soon, but I do. You're everything I've been looking for without knowing I was looking. You're strong and kind and brave. You make me want to build something permanent, to put down roots, to have a future." Tears were streaming down her face. "I love you too. I thought I was losing my mind, falling so hard so fast, but I can't help it." Then say you'll let me court you. Say you'll give us a chance. Yes. Absolutely yes. He pulled her to her feet and kissed her properly, his arms around her, and she melted into him. This was right. This was what she'd been waiting for without knowing it. Nathan cleared his throat from the doorway. Should I assume from this scene that she said yes? Quentin pulled back, grinning. She did. Good. Because I already told half the town that my sister was being courted by the man who saved her life. Would have been embarrassing if she'd turned you down. The next few weeks were the happiest of Natalie's life. Quentin was attentive and romantic, taking her on picnics and teaching her more about the desert landscape he loved. He introduced her to his employer, Bill McAllister, who invited them to visit his ranch. The McAllister Ranch was impressive, with thousands of acres and hundreds of cattle. Bill was a weathered man in his 60s who'd built his operation from nothing. He clearly valued Quentin, greeting him like a son rather than an employee. "Lawson here's one of the best men I've got," Bill said over dinner. "Been trying to convince him to stay on permanent instead of just for the drives. I've been thinking about your offer," Quentin said. "About taking that position as foreman you mentioned." Bill's eyes lit up. "You serious? That would be tremendous. I need someone I can trust to oversee the daily operations, someone who knows cattle and understands the land. There are conditions." "Name them." Quentin glanced at Natalie. "I'll need to build a house on the property. A real house, not a bunkhouse, and I'll need time off to do it right." Bill followed his gaze and a knowing smile spread across his face. "Ah, I see. Well, there's a nice piece of land near the East Spring that would be perfect for a house. Good water, some trees for shade. You could have that section as part of your compensation. That's generous." "You've earned it. When were you thinking of starting this building project?" "As soon as possible. I'm hoping to be married by summer's end." Natalie nearly choked on her water. They hadn't discussed a timeline, but hearing him say it out loud made it real and immediate and wonderful. The ride back to Douglas was full of plans and dreams. Quentin described the house he wanted to build, asking for her input on every detail. She suggested additions and changes, and he listened carefully, incorporating her ideas. "I want you to feel like it's your home as much as mine," he said. "I want you to have a say in everything." "I want a big kitchen," she said, "with lots of windows for light and a garden where I can grow vegetables and herbs." "Done. What else?" "A porch where we can sit in the evenings, and a room for guests for when Nathan visits." "All of that." "Anything you want." They were married on a sunny day in August, in the same church where they'd attended Mr. Patterson's funeral. Natalie wore a dress Mrs. Hayes had helped her sew, cream-colored silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Quentin wore a new suit, looking handsome and nervous as he waited at the altar. Nathan walked her down the aisle, tears in his eyes. "Be happy," he whispered as he placed her hand in Quentin's. "I will. I am." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When Quentin slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band he'd saved for months to buy, Natalie felt like her heart might burst from joy. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you too." Their kiss as husband and wife was met with applause and cheering from the assembled guests. It seemed like the whole town had turned out for the wedding, and the celebration afterward at Nathan's boarding house went late into the night. Finally, Quentin swept Natalie up in his arms and carried her out to a wagon decorated with ribbons. "Time to go home, Mrs. Lawson." "Home," she repeated, loving the sound of it. The house Quentin had built was even better than she'd imagined. He'd worked on it every day for the past 2 months with help from other ranch hands and even Bill McAllister himself. It was a sturdy structure with the big kitchen she'd requested, a spacious bedroom, a parlor, and a guest room. The porch wrapped around 2 sides, and he'd already started the garden, with young plants struggling to establish themselves in the rocky soil. "It's perfect," she breathed as he showed her through. "Absolutely perfect." He'd furnished it simply but thoughtfully, with a bed he'd built himself, a table and chairs, rugs on the floor. But the detail that made her cry was the bookshelf he'd constructed and filled with books, including some of the titles she'd mentioned loving during their talks. "You remembered," she said, running her fingers over the spines. "I remember everything you tell me." That night, as they lay together in their new bed, listening to the sounds of the desert through the open window, Natalie thought about the strange path that had brought her here. If her father hadn't died, if she hadn't decided to come west, if the bandits hadn't attacked, if Quentin hadn't been on that trail at that exact moment, none of this would have happened. "What are you thinking?" Quentin asked, his voice drowsy. "That I'm grateful. For all of it, even the bad parts, because they led me to you." He tightened his arms around her. "I was thinking the same thing. Every wrong turn, every mistake, every disappointment, they were all leading me here to this moment." Life on the ranch was different from anything Natalie had known, but she adapted quickly. She learned to manage a household in the middle of nowhere, to cook on a wood stove, to preserve food for the winter. She helped with the accounts, her neat handwriting and mathematical skill making her invaluable to both Quentin and Bill. The garden thrived under her care, and soon she was supplying vegetables not just for their table but for the main ranch house as well. She started a small herb garden too, remembering remedies her mother had taught her. When one of the ranch hands suffered a bad cut, she cleaned and bandaged it, and word spread. Soon she was the unofficial doctor for minor injuries and ailments. "You're indispensable," Bill told her one day when she delivered salve for his arthritis. "Don't know how we managed before you came." Quentin took to his role as foreman with natural authority. The men respected him, and the ranch prospered under his management. He worked long hours but always made time for Natalie, never taking her for granted or assuming she'd simply adapt to his life without complaint. They had their first argument about a month after the wedding, over something trivial that neither could remember later. It escalated quickly, both of them surprised by the intensity of their anger. Quentin stormed out to the barn and Natalie retreated to the bedroom, tears streaming down her face. An hour later he came back, contrite and gentle. "I'm sorry. I was wrong to speak to you that way." "I'm sorry too. I was being stubborn. We're both stubborn. We'll probably fight again. But I promise to always come back, to always work it out. I won't let anger fester, neither will I." They learned to navigate their differences, to communicate and compromise. The arguments became less frequent and less intense as they figured out how to live together, how to be partners in every sense of the word. Nathan visited regularly, delighted with his sister's happiness. "You're glowing," he said during one visit. "Marriage suits you. It does. I never imagined I could be this happy. Quentin's a good man. I'm glad you found each other." The first Christmas in their new home was magical. Natalie decorated with pine boughs and made special treats she remembered from childhood. Quentin surprised her with a beautiful shawl he'd bought in Douglas, soft wool dyed deep blue. "It matches your eyes," he said as he draped it around her shoulders. They spent Christmas Day at the main ranch house with Bill and some of the hands who had nowhere else to go. It felt like family, this gathering of people who'd chosen each other rather than being bound by blood. In the spring, Natalie realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks but waited to be sure before telling Quentin. When she finally shared the news, he was speechless with joy. "A baby," he kept repeating. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. He pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "I'm terrified and thrilled and amazed all at once." The pregnancy was mostly easy, though the summer heat made her uncomfortable. Quentin fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and work less. Bill hired a woman from Douglas to help with heavy chores, refusing to hear any arguments about it. "Your family," he said simply. "We take care of family." Nathan visited more frequently as her due date approached, wanting to be nearby when the baby came. He'd become friends with Quentin, the two men bonding over chess games and long conversations about everything from politics to philosophy. "He's perfect for you," Nathan told Natalie one evening while Quentin was out checking the stock. "I couldn't have chosen better myself. I wish Father could have met him. He would have approved. Quentin has integrity and kindness, all the qualities Father valued." The baby came on a cool October night, after 12 hours of labor that left Natalie exhausted but exhilarated. The midwife from Douglas had been staying at the ranch for the past week, and she guided Natalie through the process with calm efficiency. When the baby finally arrived, wailing lustily, the midwife placed the child in Natalie's arms. "You have a son." Quentin, who'd been banished to the parlor during the actual birth, was allowed back in. He approached the bed slowly, his eyes fixed on the tiny bundle in his wife's arms. "A boy," Natalie said softly. "We have a son." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out with one finger to touch the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers closed around his, and Quentin's eyes filled with tears. "He's perfect. You're perfect. I can't believe this is real." They named him Jacob, after Natalie's father, with the middle name William for Bill McAllister. The whole ranch celebrated, and Bill threw a party that lasted well into the night. Being parents changed them in ways both expected and surprising. Natalie discovered reserves of patience and strength she hadn't known she possessed. Quentin proved to be a natural father, gentle and playful with their son. The years that followed were full and rich. Jacob grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved the ranch and everything about it. When he was 3, they had a daughter, Emma, who inherited her father's green eyes and her mother's determination. Natalie sometimes thought about that day on the trail, about how close she'd come to losing everything before she even knew what she could have. The terror of that moment had faded with time, but she never forgot it. It had taught her how precious life was, how quickly everything could change. One evening, when Jacob was 5 and Emma was 2, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset. Jacob was chattering about something he'd seen that day, and Emma was dozing in Quentin's arms. Natalie leaned back in her rocking chair, a hand resting on her stomach where another baby was growing, and felt completely at peace. "What are you thinking?" Quentin asked, the same question he'd asked 1,000 times over the years, "That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He reached over and took her free hand. "Me too. Every single day I'm grateful for that moment on the trail, for the chance to save you, to know you, to love you. Some people might say it was just luck that you were there. I prefer to think it was fate. We were always meant to find each other. We just had to survive long enough for it to happen." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Natalie thought about the journey that had brought her here. From Missouri to Arizona, from loss to love, from fear to fulfillment. It hadn't been an easy path, but it had been worth every difficult step. Bill retired the following year, deeding the entire ranch to Quentin and Natalie. "I've got no children of my own," he said. "You two are the closest thing I've got to family. The ranch should stay with you." They tried to refuse, but he was adamant. "I'm an old man. I want to spend my remaining years knowing this place I built will be in good hands. There's no one I trust more than you two." He moved into the main ranch house's guest wing, becoming a doting grandfather figure to Jacob and Emma, and later to their third child, Sarah, born in the spring of 1887. The ranch prospered under their management. Quentin proved to be as good a businessman as he was a cattleman, making smart investments and careful decisions. Natalie kept the books and managed the household, her organizational skills and attention to detail keeping everything running smoothly. Nathan eventually married a schoolteacher who came to Douglas, a kind woman named Margaret who Natalie liked immediately. They had 2 children of their own, and the cousins grew up visiting back and forth, as close as siblings. The years brought challenges. Droughts that tested their resources, cattle diseases that decimated herds, economic downturns that made selling difficult. But they weathered each crisis together, their bond growing stronger through shared struggle. When Jacob turned 18, he announced his intention to study veterinary medicine. "I want to help animals the way you do, Pa, but I want to understand the science behind it." Quentin was initially skeptical about sending his son east to school, but Natalie convinced him. "He's smart and capable. We can't hold him back just because we'll miss him." Jacob left for college in the fall of 1898, and the house felt empty without his presence. But he wrote faithfully every week, sharing his experiences and what he was learning. He returned every summer, putting his new knowledge to work on the ranch. Emma grew into a beautiful young woman with her father's love of horses. She became an accomplished rider, competing in exhibitions and rodeos. Her fearlessness sometimes gave Natalie heart palpitations, but Quentin supported their daughter's passion. "She's her own person," he said when Natalie worried. "We can't wrap her in cotton wool." Sarah, the youngest, was quietest of the 3, happiest with a book in her hand. She inherited Natalie's love of learning and her organizational mind. By the time she was 12, she was helping manage the ranch accounts, her neat columns of figures more accurate than those of many adult bookkeepers. Bill passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1900, at the age of 85. His death hit the family hard, but he left them with a legacy of love and the knowledge that he'd been proud of what they'd built. "He was a good man," Quentin said at the funeral. "He gave us a chance when we needed it most. I'll never forget that." The turn of the century brought changes to the territory. Arizona was modernizing, with telephone lines and better roads connecting once isolated communities. Quentin was skeptical of some innovations but practical enough to adopt those that made sense. "The world is changing," he told his children. "We have to change with it or get left behind." But some things stayed the same. The ranch continued to thrive. The family remained close, and Quentin and Natalie's love for each other only deepened with time. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Quentin took Natalie back to the hidden spring where he'd first told her he loved her. The place had changed little, still a secret oasis in the desert. "You remember what I said here?" he asked as they sat on the same flat rock. "You said you'd been waiting your whole life without knowing what you were waiting for. I still feel that way, like everything before you was just marking time until we could find each other. I wish we could have had more time. 20 years isn't enough." He pulled her close. "Then we'll have to make the most of however many years we get. Every day is a gift, Natalie. I learned that the day I almost lost you." They watched the sun set over the spring, 2 people who'd found in each other exactly what they'd needed, even before they knew they needed it. Jacob graduated from veterinary school and returned to the ranch, setting up a practice that served not just their animals but those of neighboring ranches as well. He married a woman he'd met at school, a fellow veterinarian named Alice, and they settled in a house they built near the main ranch house. Emma shocked everyone by falling in love with a schoolteacher from Douglas, a quiet, scholarly man who seemed like her complete opposite. But Natalie recognized the way her daughter looked at him, the same way she'd looked at Quentin all those years ago. Love doesn't always make logical sense, she told Quentin when he worried about the match. Sometimes it just is. The wedding was beautiful, and as Natalie watched Emma dance with her new husband, she felt the circle of life completing itself. Her daughter had found her person, just as Natalie had found hers. Sarah announced at 16 that she wanted to attend college, to study business and commerce. I want to understand how ranches like ours can be more efficient, more profitable. I want to help our family's legacy grow. They sent her east to school, proud of her ambition and intelligence. She was the first woman in the family to pursue higher education, and she took to it like a duck to water. As the years rolled on, Quentin's hair turned silver and lines deepened around his eyes. But to Natalie, he was as handsome as the day she'd first seen him on that rocky outcrop. His body might have aged, but his spirit remained strong. They became grandparents multiple times over. Jacob and Alice had 3 children. Emma and her husband had 2. Each grandchild was precious, each one carrying forward the legacy of family and love that Quentin and Natalie had built. On quiet evenings, they would sit on their porch, hands joined, watching the sun set over land that had become truly theirs through decades of work and care. "You ever regret it?" Quentin asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. "Leaving Missouri, coming west, everything that happened? Not for a second. How could I regret the path that led me to you, even the attack, even that terrible day, even that? Because it brought you into my life, because it led to all of this." She gestured at the ranch, at their home, at the life they'd built. "I'd go through it 1,000 times if it meant ending up here with you." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Natalie Lawson. I loved you from the moment I saw you lying in the dust, fighting back with everything you had. I'll love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." As they sat together in the gathering dusk, the sounds of the ranch settling for the night around them, Natalie reflected on the incredible journey of her life. She'd come west looking for a fresh start, for a place to rebuild after loss. She'd found so much more than that. She'd found purpose in building a home and raising a family. She'd found strength she didn't know she possessed. She'd found community in the rough frontier town that had become her home. But most importantly, she'd found love, true and lasting love, with a man who cherished her every single day. The frontier had been wild and dangerous, full of uncertainty and risk. But it had also been full of possibility, of chances for new beginnings and unexpected happiness. She'd been terrified that day on the trail, convinced she was going to die. Instead, she'd been saved by a cowboy with green eyes and a good heart, and that moment had changed everything. Sarah returned from college with a degree in business and immediately began implementing new practices on the ranch. Her innovations increased efficiency and profitability, ensuring that the ranch would thrive for generations to come. She eventually married a lawyer from Douglas, a partnership of minds as much as hearts. Together, they had 2 children, expanding the family further. By the time Quentin and Natalie celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary, they were surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The celebration was held at the ranch, with people coming from all over Arizona territory to join in. Nathan, now in his 70s, gave a toast that had everyone in tears. "To my sister and the man who saved her life, who gave her a life worth saving, may you have many more years of happiness together." That night, alone in their room, Quentin held Natalie close. 40 years. Can you believe it's been 40 years? Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like forever. But every year has been a gift. I meant what I said back then, that first day at the spring. You were what I'd been waiting for. I just didn't know it until I saw you. We saved each other, Quentin. You saved my life and I saved your heart. We made each other whole. The years continued to pass, bringing the joys and sorrows common to long lives well lived. They lost friends and gained new ones. They watched their children raise families of their own. They saw Arizona achieve statehood in 1912, a moment of pride for everyone who'd worked to build the territory. Through it all, their love remained constant, a steady flame that warmed everyone around them. Their grandchildren grew up watching the way they looked at each other, the way they still held hands, the gentle teasing and deep affection that characterized their relationship. I want a love like Grandma and Grandpa's, more than one grandchild declared, setting their standards high. When Quentin was 75, he fell ill with pneumonia. For weeks, he hovered between life and death, and Natalie barely left his bedside. She held his hand, talked to him constantly, willing him to fight. "You don't get to leave me yet," she whispered fiercely. "We have more time. We have more life to live together." He recovered, slowly and painfully, but he recovered. When he was finally able to sit up in bed, his first words were for her. "Still stubborn as ever, I see. Wouldn't even let death take me away from you. Absolutely not." "I'm not done with you yet, Quentin Lawson." They had 5 more good years together. Years of watching sunsets and playing with great-grandchildren. Years of quiet companionship and deep love. Years of knowing that every day together was precious. Quentin passed away peacefully one spring morning, Natalie holding his hand. His last words were simple and perfect. "I love you, wait for me. Always," she promised through her tears. The family gathered for the funeral, 3 generations mourning a man who'd been the foundation of everything they had. Natalie stood strong through it all, drawing comfort from the children and grandchildren whose existence was testimony to the love she and Quentin had shared. She lived another 3 years without him, staying active and involved in ranch life. She played with her great-grandchildren, shared stories of the early days, and kept Quentin's memory alive through her tales. But everyone could see that a piece of her was missing. She was whole and happy in many ways, but there was a loneliness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. On a quiet evening in late summer, Natalie asked Jacob to take her to the hidden spring one last time. He helped her make the journey, worried about her health but understanding her need. She sat on the flat rock where Quentin had first told her he loved her, where they'd celebrated their 20th anniversary, where so many important moments had happened. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors. "It's beautiful," she said to Jacob. "This place was always special to us." "I know, Ma. He talked about it sometimes, about bringing you here that first time. He saved my life, you know, not just from the bandits, but in every way that matters. He gave me a reason to live, a purpose, a family. Everything I have, everything you are, exists because a cowboy with a good heart decided to help a stranger." She closed her eyes, feeling the warm evening air on her face, hearing the gentle sound of the spring. "Thank you," she whispered, whether to Quentin or God or fate itself. She wasn't sure. Jacob found her an hour later, still sitting peacefully on the rock, a slight smile on her face. She'd passed quietly, looking out over the spring she'd loved, going to join the man she'd loved even more. They buried her next to Quentin on a hilltop overlooking the ranch. The headstone read, "Natalie Thompson Lawson, 1862-1928, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She found love on the frontier." The family gathered around the grave, sharing stories and memories. Sarah, now a successful businesswoman, spoke of her mother's strength and wisdom. Emma talked about her mother's courage and kindness. Jacob remembered the love his parents had shown each other and how it had shaped his understanding of what marriage should be. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren listened, absorbing these stories, understanding that they were part of something larger than themselves. They were the legacy of a love story that had begun with a rescue on a dusty trail and had grown into something beautiful and lasting. The ranch continued to thrive under the family's care, passing down through generations. Jacob's children took over management, implementing new practices while honoring the traditions their grandparents had established. The hidden spring became a family secret, a place where important conversations happened and proposals were made. Every year on the anniversary of Quentin and Natalie's wedding, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. They shared the story of how their matriarch and patriarch had met, how a terrible moment had led to a beautiful life. The younger generations listened with wide eyes to the tale of bandits and rescue, of love blooming in the desert, of a partnership that had built an empire of family and land. They learned that love could strike like lightning, that sometimes you knew immediately when you'd met the right person, and that a strong foundation of respect and affection could weather any storm. The story became part of the family mythology, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. But unlike many legends, this one was true in every particular. Quentin had rescued Natalie from bandits on the frontier trail. He had realized she was the one he'd been waiting for. And together, they had built a love that lasted a lifetime and echoed through the generations. Their story proved that even in the harsh wilderness of the Old West, even in a time of violence and uncertainty, love could flourish. That two strangers could become soulmates. That a single moment of courage could change the course of multiple lives. As the sun set over the ranch they had built, as it had set countless times before, the legacy of Quentin and Natalie Lawson lived on. In the land they'd tended, in the family they'd raised, in the love they'd shared. They had found each other against all odds, and that finding had created something that would endure long after they were gone. Their great-great-grandchildren would work the same land, sit on the same porch, and look out over the same sunset. They would tell their children about the cowboy who saved a woman from bandits and realized she was his destiny. They would talk about the love that had started it all, the foundation upon which everything else was built. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the desert scrub, and the stars came out one by one, some family members swore they could feel the presence of their ancestors, still watching over the land they'd loved, still together in whatever lay beyond. The story of Quentin and Natalie Lawson became more than just family history. It became a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that courage came in many forms, and that sometimes the worst moments of our lives led directly to the best. It taught that partnership and respect were the bedrock of lasting love, and that choosing someone every single day was what made a marriage work. Their letters to each other, carefully preserved by their children, revealed the depth of their connection. Quentin's rough handwriting and Natalie's neat script told stories of daily life, of challenges overcome and joys shared. Reading them, generations later, was like glimpsing into a love story that had been real and true and utterly remarkable. The ranch itself stood as a monument to what they'd built together. Not just the buildings and fences, the cattle and horses, but the sense of family and home that permeated every inch of the property. Visitors often commented on the feeling of the place, how it seemed to radiate warmth and welcome. "That's Grandma and Grandpa's legacy," the family would say. "They built this place with love, and it shows." In the town of Douglas, now a thriving city, there was a historical marker on the spot where Nathan's old boarding house had stood. It commemorated the Thompson and Lawson families and their contributions to the community. School children on field trips learned about the early days of Arizona, about the people who'd built something from nothing in the harsh frontier. And always, the story came back to that day on the trail. To the bandits and the rescue, to the cowboy with green eyes and the woman with courage. To the moment when two strangers' lives intersected and changed course forever. Because in the end, that's what the story of Quentin and Natalie Lawson was about. The transformative power of love, the courage to take chances, and the beauty of building a life with someone who truly saw you and chose you every single day for a lifetime. Their love story, born in violence and fear, had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. It proved that happy endings were possible, even in the Wild West. That true love existed if you were brave enough to reach for it. And that sometimes, the person you were waiting for your whole life appeared when you least expected them, in the middle of the desert, surrounded by danger, offering a hand and changing everything forever.